Okay. So today we've got a nice scene. Young man looking very pensive, sitting on the rocks in southwest Utah. Beautiful sunny day. Nice little figurative here. So I'm going to use 3 brushes: a large flat, a small flat, and this is a number 9 round brush. And this will give me all the detail that I need. Basically, in the photo here, just looking at this photo briefly, we have the young man here with the sun hitting him on the left side of his face and his body, holding a couple of water bottles, and the rocks and some grass showing through a little bit of some of the rocks. We're not painting the grass down here. We're focusing a little bit more on the upper part of the rocks. There's a little bit of grass here. We'll paint that in, and some of the clouds, okay? So I'm going to start with the sky. I'm going to use my large flat brush, and I'm not going to do wet on wet with this. I'm just, because this is a relatively small painting, like a quarter sheet. So I'm going to paint wet onto dry. So that is, wet the brush a lot with the color, the blue, and go right at it and paint around the clouds. So I'm going to start with some cerulean blue. Okay. Some going here. And start painting it in. The brush drags a little bit over, since I'm using cold pressed paper here. The brush drags over the paper a little bit. That's okay. Doesn't have to complete coverage. Be careful to paint around the rocks. And be careful to paint around the figure. On the left side here, our left side here, if you paint over the figure a little bit, that's okay, because he's going to be in shadow. But we want to be careful with his other side, where the sun hits, because the sunlight is pretty important here. Okay. So this is where it pays to have a good brush, because you can easily paint around the details, not have to move to another brush. There we go. A little bit here, sky showing through under his leg. Okay. Sure to load up the brush. There we go. A lot of pigment and water. Then you could take some additional water, smooth out some hard edges if you want. I like to leave it a little expressive here. Have some horizontal streaks going, indicate some of the movement in the clouds. There we are. Okay. You want to darken up some spots. It's a pretty sunny day here, so we're not going to darken up too much using some ultramarine, or just adding an additional little color in here. A little brown or a little yellow, actually, just to kind of add an additional color into the sky, especially near the horizon. Okay, so we have that put in, and I'm going to start blocking in some of the rocks down here. And with the rocks, I'm going to use some earth tones, some yellow ochre. I'm going to use some alizarin crimson. I'll use some ultramarine blue and some sepia, some different colors. What I want to do is first look at where the light is hitting the strongest, and it's on the right side here. and it's a little bit behind him, so I'm just going to be a little mindful of those areas. And I think I'll leave them white. So what I'll do is I'll start off with some yellow ochre. Mix that onto my palette, actually, where I have some of my cerulean. It's getting sort of a dark greenish color. I want a little stronger yellow ochre. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag the brush over the face of some of these rocks, trying to give it a little texture. See the rocks up here. Watch out for where the light's hitting. Okay. I'm going to use a fair amount of water with this because I'm going to mix other colors into some of it. I want some nice blending to happen. Okay. And again, when painting in dark areas, like here, in heavily shadowed, heavily shaded areas, it's good to first make sure that your drawing is pretty strong, because I'm going to be painting over it, and I don't want to lose the drawing with just one application of paint. So if your drawing's really lightly penciled in, and you're painting a dark shadowed area here, you risk losing your drawing. So you want to darken it a little bit. Make sure your pencil lines are a little strong, especially in the shaded areas. Okay, now while some of this is still wet, I'm going to start introducing other colors. I'm going to start with a little burnt sienna. And what I'm doing is, these rocks, is I'm blocking in shapes. If there's little details in here, grass or any other unusual forms, I'll worry about those later. Right now I just want to block in the larger shapes. Okay. I can now start adding a little sepia. Just building up my darkest shaded areas. Okay. When you look at these structures, I mean, if you get a chance to look at them in person, you'll see a lot of the beautiful colors that actually are in here that don't show up in the photo. It's always important to observe from nature. If you don't paint from nature, to at least record these things either in a notebook or with your camera when you're out and about. Because in the photograph, the photograph lies to us. It flattens everything. It makes everything two-dimensional, and it focuses the background, which in reality might be out of focus. Here we don't really have a background to worry about. A lot of stuff is just all foreground in one plane here. But when working from photographs, we have to take these things into account and realize that there's a lot more in here than what the camera is telling us. Now, for instance, I could see in this rock here, there's some nice blues, so I'm going to take some cerulean and drop it in there. Because no matter where you are in the United States, whatever rock structures you're looking at, it, be it volcanic ash, be it granite, the colors that are in them are just amazing. So the reds and the blues, and it's not just all the same. You've got a little bit of turquoise here. Okay. Use a little bit of ultramarine blue. I look at this and I decide where there's a few key points that are my darkest areas. That's where I'm going to drop in my darkest concentration of color, which would be a nice mixture of ultramarine blue and sepia. And then you've got a couple other areas that you could punctuate with some of the other colors. Okay. I know there's some grass coming through here. I'll do a little negative painting and just sort of indicate that. A little bit. Okay. Darken up here. Okay. Start darkening up some of these a little bit more. Taking full advantage of using the different sides of this flat brush. Because it looks like, even though it looks like just your regular paintbrush that, when you're doing house painting with, the beauty of these are that you could turn them, paint with just the tips on the side, you create lines. You can do quite a bit of detail work with them. Now at some point though, I'm going to put this down when I'm working on the figure and I'll be using the round brush. But for the rocks, I get quite a bit of mileage out of this. Okay. All right. What I'll do now, clean off the brush. So now I just have a damp brush. And while this is still a little damp down here, I'm going to lift out some highlights on the side of the brush. There we go. You could even use the back of the brush a little bit to create lines. Okay. I'm going to move to the round brush now. So that's it for the large flat brush. I've blocked in the sky, the majority of the rocks.
And what size was that?
This is this is a 1-inch flat brush. So if we're working like an 8x10 paper here, and then the size of the stuff I had, this 1-inch brush did really good. I do have the smaller flat brush, which I don't think I need at this point because some other details I'm going to use. I'll now move to my number 9 round brush. Number 9 or number 10 round brush is good. What's important with this brush, if you're working with this brush, is that it's in real good shape. See that nice point I have on there? Good for details. So that's what we'll need. Okay. The first thing I'm going to start with on the figure, and I'll come back after my rocks are dry, just a little hair on there, and add in a few additional details, but I want this to dry first before I add in maybe a few more grass leaves or branches or a few extra little rocks. So, you know. Start with some gamboge and some light red. And really make his skin tone drop in his skin. Real nice and bright. This is gamboge. I'm making a flesh tone, which is an orange. So a gamboge and a nice warm red, if you have a cadmium red light, or a Windsor red or a scarlet red. There we go. Now this look may look very intense to start, but remember, it does lighten up considerably once it dries. So watch.
Yeah, they're so terrible.
But what's going to happen is we're going to blend in some of this into the shadow areas, and we're going to lift out some highlights. So that's why we start real intense to begin with, because a lot of times when painting the human figure, you'll see people just be very timid with their flesh tones, and they look dull and pale and very flat. We want them to really, you know, have a nice presence about them. So now I'm going to mix up a dark here with my sepia and my ultramarine blue, and paint around his face and his shoulder. And some of that paint, some of the pigment will carry into the shadow area of his face. This is where having a good tip on the brush pays off, because we gotta be careful here. Okay. I'm going to add a little bit more blue into the dark that I have, so it'll have a little bit more of a dark blue bias to start filling in some of the shadows on his shirt and pants. Now he looks like he's wearing basically a light shirt and some khakis here, kind of the same color. We'll add a little additional color into that. Otherwise he's going to blend in with the rocks a little bit too much. Okay. Basically, I'm laying down a shadow color here, but it's not too dark. In other words, I can still see my drawing underneath this. So what I'm doing is I'm blocking in the shaded areas right now to kind of help guide my eye around the shapes that I have here. Then, once it dries, I move in with some of the little details. So we've got his shoes, inside of his pant, just a little bit on his leg, under the bottle. This is actually blue. I got to paint that in. Sky. Okay. Again, I'll paint a shadow. The arm darkens a little bit. Okay. Now we're starting to see his shape emerge a little bit. We're starting to see where the lights are and where the darks are. His form is starting to make itself known. Okay. take care of a couple other little things here before I forget. Just fill in a little bit of the sky back here. Okay. Now while some of this is drying, just got a water bottle there, which I'm going to make a little more orangish. Looks like he's got some iced tea going. Something to drink, so I'm going to fill some of that in. Go. And this other bottle almost looked empty. There's other little details in here we'll get to. We'll come back with later once some more of this is dried. Let me also paint in his other hand here. There we go. Okay. All right, I'm going to let a little bit of this dry, a little bit more. While that's drying, I'm going to go back, turn my attention back to the rocks. Let me just, okay. Back to the rocks. There's just a couple of additional little details I want to put in here. And with the round brush, it's a little easier than with the flat brush. So that's just some of the, let's see, mix got a little alizarin crimson here. Some sepia. A little blue in there. Okay. Just to what I'm doing is I'm adding additional contrast between this edge here. I'm creating a stronger edge between my lights and darks. Some of the rocks. I can soften up some of that too down here. Okay. So depending on how true to the geology you want to stay here, you can play with the rock formations as much as you want. I'm just going to add in that much, not too much, because I want this lighted area to show up. Okay. Now, what I had mentioned before about a little negative painting with some of this grass, I could actually paint in some darks. Kind of helps reinforce some of these forms a little bit more. Okay. A little darker down here. What happens too now, since some of this is dried, you'll notice it also has lightened up a little bit. So there are some areas that I want to go back in with some darks and make them a little darker. This also helps push some of these forms forward a little bit more. So. Some nice additional contrasts. Okay. Let's see. Here. There we go. and I can drag the brush over the rocks. This is sort of like a scumbling technique. In other words, the brush isn't very wet, but by doing this I create additional texture. Okay. So I think that's it for the rocks. For now, anyway. Now I can go back into the figure and finish him up. On his pants, what I want to do is, right now, I'm going to add some yellow ochre. Just to give it a little more color. Okay. But again, I can still see my drawing back here. And for his shirt, yeah, his shirt doesn't have much color to it, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little turquoise to that. So it's not just his face and his hands that your eye will go to. You could add a turquoise, a green, any other color, just to give it a little. Just so he's not all gray. Okay, now I'm going to start at the top, work my way down. Mix up some sepia and ultramarine here. Under his cap, looks the darkest. Paint that in. You do see a little bit of his hair behind his cheek, his face. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to soften some of this. I've cleaned off my brush, just water. And I'm going to bring in some of these darks into the face. Mouth. The eye. The eye socket, always dark. Find the ear a little bit. Looking at some of the stronger shapes on his face, nose. Okay, so I'm going to leave that for now. Let that dry a little bit and start bringing the shadows down into his body. Now I can go ahead and do things like to push his arm forward. I'm going to make the shadows behind his arm darker. Torso. if you're more comfortable with a smaller brush, you know, if you want to use like a number 6 or a number 4 detail brush, you can certainly do that. This brush, the point on it's pretty strong, so I'm pretty comfortable working with it. Start at the bottom of the shoe. Now at this point, since I added in some of this additional color, it's still a little bit wet, so I might choose to kind of let it dry a little bit more. Because I do want some edges between the lights and the darks, a little bit more. Sounds like spring outside.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I can add in. Now I can look at details like the bottle, top of the bottle. Between his fingers. See how this red has already lightened up considerably since I painted it in, so that's got to be, you know, that's why I say start a little more intense than you think you would normally do, and you'll be surprised at how much it lightens up.
What color is it?
This is just red right now. Top of the bottle. He's got some iced tea in there. Okay, I want this to dry a little bit more because there's, you know, I don't want him to be just this solid mass. I do want, you know, as these lights, when the sunlight hits, just like on the rocks, how it's important to retain those whites. It's also very important to make sure that your darks go where they belong and not get too muddy. Otherwise, then that becomes flat too. See how we have some darks in here, but then we have some medium tones to help create shape. Well, we certainly want that with him. We don't want him to get lost. So helps. Now we can go in and start painting in some of the creases here. There we go. Okay, on the shirt, lift out a little bit more. I don't want his arm blending in with his back too much, so we lift out a little color there. How's he looking? Okay. Okay, so see what we got here. Well, for a small 8x10, he's in pretty good shape. I might wait for I'm going to wait for the figure to dry just a little bit more, to put in a little bit more line work in some of his clothing to make that, you know, some of the creases a little bit more apparent, some of the detail. I might even put another hint of red on the top of his arm or the side of his face, just to bring a little extra strong color into that. But this is pretty much it. And what this does here is this creates a nice little painting for us, and also this would also act for a nice preparation for a larger painting if I wanted to do a larger version of this. Say I wanted to paint this but in 18x24 size, you know, to give as a gift to be on a wall, you know, over a couch or something like that. I do a nice small painting like this, because I'm doing it fast. And when you paint fast like this, you tend to forget about the details and just think of the basic shapes that you have to worry about. What are the big shapes? What are the rounds and the flats and the squares, and you know what's important first? Those lights and those flesh tones and the shapes in the grass or in the rocks. You know, here I'm not going to get too crazy about the geology of the rocks. I'm not going to really get in there and like illustrate it, or even with him. This isn't really like a portrait per se. It's just you know, he only occupies a small portion of this painting. So there's only going to be so much detail. Right now, I think this is fine. Like I might again want to. I might decide to put, you know, make some of the creases in and the folds in his pants a little bit more apparent, and maybe detail around his hands a little bit more. But that's really about it. That's really about it. So I'm going to stop this for now, let it dry, and I'll come back to it in a little bit. These help define the finishing details that I added now. Help define the form a little bit more. We've got a little more darker on the side of the face. Pants. Back. Behind the arm. Okay. We're all set.